On this episode, we've got some 2024 NHL Draft prospect updates, including a comparison between Zayne Parekh and Sam Dickinson. We'll talk about some of the Finnish top guns and much more coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week. I'm Hadi and Sebastian, joined by Sebastian. Hi. And on today's episode, we'll bring you a couple updates on some of the 2024 NHL Draft prospects that we've watched in the last few weeks. This will include players like Zayne Parekh, who's really climbed on both of our rankings. We'll compare him with Sam Dickinson, who's been the main top gun among OHL defensemen. We'll also talk about some of the top Finnish prospects in this next draft, including Konsta Helenius, Aron Kiviharju, and Emil Hemming. And then we'll talk a bit more about some other prospects here that are kind of outside of that range, guys like Ondrej Kos, Artyom Levshunov, Anton Silayev, and much more coming up on today's episode. Before we get into any of it, though, just make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us. We always review them and keep them for our good mailbag episodes. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very, very much appreciated. So, Sebastian, let's get this started off hot here with Zayne Parekh. You've logged a couple of recent viewings of his. I've always been kind of a big fan. I loved what I saw from him at the highly-touted Cup, but apparently you've got some good things to say here about your recent viewings about him, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I watched him a couple times in passing last year, and every single time I saw him play, I was just getting very excited, but I didn't want to get too ahead of myself because D-1 viewings are always a little bit iffy when you're trying to project a player as an NHL draft pick. And then the Hlinka tournament was kind of just confirming all the things I had already been seeing in my OHL viewings last year. And he's a lot of fun. He's definitely inside my tentative top 5 at this point. That's not a solid range at all because my sample is still quite small, but I'm a really, really big fan. He's a tremendously dynamic offensive defenseman with a great set of tools. He is an elite skater. He has tremendous four-way mobility. He's a very, very good puck handler, very deceptive, really understands how to use his own movements and his own deception to really create holes in defensive structures and how to pull individual defenders away from the play and then pass it backwards to a teammate to kind of exploit that new gap. He constantly uses his teammates as well, very actively. He's not the type of player that will try to do everything on his own, even though he can. He's good enough to. He probably has the best shot among all defenders in this draft class. I know it's very early to say that, but he would have had the best shot of any defender in the 2023 draft class as well. So I feel okay with that prediction at this point in time. And he's also solid enough defensively. It's not the biggest strength, but he's a strong stick checker. He uses his mobility and his skating to patrol a really, really big portion of defensive ice. And in defensive transition, he still has to learn how to be a little bit more consistently proactive, but the tools are there for him to be an above average defensive contributor on top of being an electrifying offensive defenseman. So I'm a really, really big fan of Zayne Parekh, and I'm so excited to watch him live a lot this season.
Yeah, no, glad you hopped on that train because, man, he really impressed me at the Hlinka Cup. I was really, really impressed with, some players, you'll see them on skates and you can feel that it's a hindrance to their, that they're inconvenienced by the fact of having blades on their feet. That's not the case for Zayne Parekh at all. He's super, super comfortable in his skating stride, extremely fluid, extremely mobile. And he just, there's an ease and comfort to a lot of the things he does. He's never kind of over panicking or throwing pucks away. He's always trying things, always trying to push the pace. Sometimes to a fault. There are some situations where you just got to get the puck out like right away. But he's still got that high-end composure that I really like to see in those fluid, mobile defensemen. For a guy of his size to play the way he does, a lot of these players, we think of Luke Hughes. He's about the same size and is another great skater. Luke Hughes doesn't use his skating to uplift his defensive game. He can get caught flat-footed. He can get too aggressive on pinches, leave his team in trouble. With St. Parekh, you really feel that his skating is a plus to his defensive game. He uses it to close gaps effectively. He uses it to get his stick in the right lanes. He's able to push, he's got an explosive push off his inside leg, and he's able to just push into lanes and immediately close them off within one bound. I mean, it's really impressive to watch him go about it. And so I'm really interested to see how Zayne Parekh's game develops and how he adds tools to his game, how he rounds out his skill set and becomes kind of a more well-rounded and more cohesive player. Because a lot of the things he does individually, but he's got the smarts to put it all together. He's got the composure to be able to do these things together under pressure, which you really want to see from defensemen at the next level. So I'm really interested and I'm very allured by the skill set with him. But I do want to talk a bit about Sam Dickinson and how he compares to Zayne Parekh stylistically, because we were talking a bit before the episode, and you mentioned that you can see some comparables between Zayne Parekh and Sam Dickinson versus Axel Sandin-Pellikka and Dmitri Simashev. Talk me through that a bit and what you see in kind of the stylistic differences between those two players.
I think when I said that, it was more like the dichotomy of like the two top defensemen, because last season, at least internally at Dobber, and I think overall in the public scouting sphere, Simashev and Axel Sandin-Pellikka were the two most exciting defensive prospects. And that's kind of how I feel about Dickinson and Parekh at this point in time. Sam Dickinson, quite similarly to Dmitri Simashev, is a very, very fluid skating defenseman who excels in his own zone. He's extremely effective at shutting down plays, and he patrols a lot of ice. He's a very strong skater. He routinely clears the net front. He's strong in the breakout. He has decent enough puck skills, and there are moments where he activates offensively and flashes some really impressive offensive abilities, which reminds me a lot of like early season Dmitri Simashev last season. And similarly with Zayne Parekh, you kind of have the shooting skill that Axel Sandin-Pellikka has, with a similar frame, the high-end skating, the dynamic offensive ability. But at least at this point in time, I'm more excited by Parekh than I am about Sandin-Pellikka, whereas I think Dickinson and Simashev at this point in time is a little bit tighter for me. I think that we're going to be looking at these two players and comparing them a lot for the entirety of this season, just as we did with Sandin-Pellikka and Simashev last year.
No, absolutely. That fully makes sense. And, I remember my notes after the Hlinka Gretzky Cup for Sam Dickinson. It was 3 very simple words. It was man amongst boys. And he was just dominant physically. He was able to the level of maturity in his game is so much more advanced than Parekh's. Parekh's is a lot more raw, but you're looking at Parekh's skill set and you could see the clear pathway to a kind of a top pair offensive defenseman kind of role. I see Sam Dickinson as more of a number 2, number 3 pure shutdown defensive defenseman, which is just as exciting, really. But we'll see how that goes. I mean, I'm very interested to see how he develops and how his game improves as the year goes on. And again, we'll be comparing them a lot. They'll be playing in the same league. They'll be facing each other a lot. So it's going to be a very, very interesting year for OHL defensemen overall, eh?
Oh, for sure. And I'm going to be getting a lot of up-close, first-hand live viewings this year, but of all those players, and especially because the next OHL defenseman in that mix is Henry Muse, who I've already watched 20-plus times, and I will watch 20-plus times again this season with live viewings here in Ottawa. So it's going to be a very, very fun season for me.
Absolutely. So, we'll be moving on to our second segment where we'll talk a bit more about some of the lesser known prospects or lesser talked about prospects overall of the 2024 NHL Draft. We'll talk about Ondrej Kos, Artyom Levshunov, and Anton Silayev right after this word from our new sponsor, for today's episode is going to be Jayce Medical. Jayce Medical offers a great range of medical tools to keep you healthy and to keep you safe. Mainly, first and foremost, they've got a Jayce case that provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jayce case is simply to fill out a simple form online, and in some rare cases, just talking to a physician real quick on the phone or by video call. And you'll be able to get ongoing care from their physicians for any treatment-related questions. On top of that, it's a doctor-created platform and it's doctor-recommended, so it's really useful in these cases. It's really important to not get caught unprepared when it comes to your physical health. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and for their loved ones when the unexpected hits. Jayce handles everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. I'm the type of guy who gets a lot of physical illnesses. A lot of the time I get sick very often. I have access to Jayce through my medical insurance with work, and it's very useful. One quick call, you've got a medical note, you've got antibiotics coming to your door. If you have a sinus infection, if you got that kind of thing, very, very useful. And with shortages with medication and all that stuff, it's really important to stay ahead of the curve and to be ready for unexpected illnesses, because you never know when they're going to hit, especially during flu season. So you can save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jayce Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using the code locked on at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll be talking about some more, I wouldn't say obscure, but less generally talked about prospects from the 2024 NHL Draft. We'll start with Ondrej Kos, who really impressed me at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. I'm guessing that's where you got your viewings as well, right?
Yep, indeed.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, Ondrej Kos was really impressive in my viewings that I saw from him for Czechia at the 2023 Hlinka Gretzky Cup. But, you've watched him in detail and in isolation lately, so talk me through what you like from him.
Ondrej Kos is a really fun, toolsy defensive winger. The amount of defensive intelligence that he was able to portray at the Hlinka Gretzky tournament was really impressive to me. He was one of the best forecheckers and backcheckers in the entire tournament in my viewings, and was consistently well positioned in the defensive zone, always dropping very low to support, almost playing the role of a center in the defensive zone at times for Czechia. And constantly supporting his defensemen and coming in really importantly against some really good teams. Like one of the views I logged of him was against Sweden, and he was the most effective Czech player defensively in that game in my viewing, including the actual Czech defenseman. Yep. And on top of that, he's a fluid skater. He's quite agile for his size. He's about like 6'2", 6'3". And he moves with an impressive amount of agility. He's quite a fluid puck handler. He still needs to kind of learn to keep the puck closer to his body to protect possession, and how to use his strength to protect possession more effectively, because as of right now, he's still really growing into his frame, and the physical part of the game is still a bit rough around the edges for him. But he has a pretty good shot. He's a good skater. The handling's strong. He has the same level of intelligence offensively that he does defensively. He's constantly moving around, trying to prod defensive structures and trying to find open space. And I really do think that once he does grow into his frame, like right now he's logged at like 6'2" and like 160 pounds or something. Like he still really needs to grow into the big frame that he has. Once that happens, I could really see a defense first power forward be the player that he becomes here. He has all the tools to kind of work with that style, and I was really impressed with my viewings of him. He's really fun, and I always like it when a player, even early on in draft season, can impress me specifically for the defensive side of the game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was the main thing that stood out for me as well, is just how solid and how mature defensively he was. Like you said, he's the type of player who needs to fill out his frame, who does have some weight to put on, has some warts to work through in terms of his skating stride, in terms of his overall effectiveness and efficiency in his game. There's some lost movements that don't really, just kind of making his game more concise would be really good. But overall, I really, really like the defensive game of Ondrej Kos, and I'm really interested to see what we see from him this year. We'll have our scouts in, taking care of Czechia and Slovakia. Really keep a close eye on these guys. There's also a very interesting 2025 NHL draft eligible that's looking really good, and that looked really good for Czechia in that tournament. So he's a very exciting player, but I do want to give a quick mention to Artyom Levshunov because he's a player that I've watched a bit more of, and I've kind of cooled down on him a bit. He looked to me like a top 10 candidate. I'm seeing more of the 20 to 30 range type of player out of Levshunov. And it's just that, I was a bit more sold on his tools. He's a very intelligent player. He's a really defensively responsible player, but there's a lack of cohesiveness in his stick handling and his shooting and his skating overall. None of his tools really benefit the other. They're kind of isolated, each in their own kind of bubble. And you don't like to see that from prospects who you would like to pick in the top 10. So I'm a bit more tentative regarding Levshunov, but there's a lot of room to grow and there's a lot of hockey to play yet. He's going to be playing, I believe, in the NCAA this year, which will help him a decent amount. It'll be interesting how he plays against men, because that's a different game than the USHL game, especially when you're playing for a lesser known team, when you're not playing for the Chicago Steel, when you're not playing for the USNTDP, you're a bit less well surrounded. But also the competition you're facing often in the division that you are is a bit more hit or miss, right? But with Levshunov playing in the NCAA, I feel like he's going to have a better opportunity to fill out his potential, and especially to kind of every one of his warts is going to be accentuated playing against more mature, more quick, more intelligent players in the NCAA. So I'm being a very, very close eye on Levshunov and how he develops. And for the moment, he's slipped out of the top 10 conversation for me entirely, and is looking, like I said, more like a 20 to 30 range player. Now, there's another player that is kind of gaining some traction right now, a 6'7" defenseman out of Russia, Anton Silayev. I've seen him in a top 5 on one ranking. I don't know about that at all. You've watched a game of his recently. Just talk me through what you saw from him, what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are, and where you project Anton Silayev going at the end of the day.
Yeah, he's really funny. This is a very interesting player to scout. I don't know if I've been more entertained by a viewing in a long time, but that's not necessarily a scouting compliment in this case.
Yeah.
Silayev's massive. He's 6'7", and he has really smooth edges. And I think that basis alone is going to get him drafted in the top 64 at least. That said, it was a KHL viewing, so I'm going to try to keep my criticisms a little bit more muted, just because this is him playing in one of the better leagues in the world, and the bad looks a lot worse when you're in that type of situation. But the scanning habits were very, very weak in my viewing. The processing speed was a bit scary. He panicked under pressure quite consistently. And while he does have smooth edge work, he is quite awkward in his overall movements, because again, he's 6'7" and he plays like a 17-year-old who's 6'7". He's really quite he hasn't fully understood how to use his body to his advantage yet. At this point in time, I think that he'd be a better hockey player if he were a little bit smaller. He still has to learn how to use his size to his advantage. I think the physicality will become a positive, but as of right now, contact initiation isn't a strength for him. And he's very, very aggressive. I don't think I've scouted a more aggressive defenseman in the last 2 years than the 1.5 viewings I've gotten of Anton Silayev so far this year. He will try to force a turnover at the offensive blue line every single time the puck is turned over in the offensive zone, which leads to a lot of 2-on-1s, because KHL players are quite good at evading pressure. And when you have a 6'7" defenseman taking 5 strides to try to close a gap towards you, there's enough time to make a play there and to get around that obstacle. So he's very, very aggressive. He can lose sight of his assignment quite regularly, and he will chase the puck carrier quite often, even when his defensive partner already has that covered. But this is a very wacky type of hockey player, and I'm very curious to see how he progresses this season, and especially how his viewings in maybe the MHL are. At the very least, I could go back and watch some D-1 tape of him playing versus junior competition, because I think it would paint a more accurate picture of the player that he is. But he's very interesting. He's one of the wackier players I've come across so far in the 2024 NHL Draft class.
Yeah, fully agreed. I'm very interested to see how he develops and what we see from him in the MHL, because the KHL tape was awful. But yeah, we'll talk about a trio of Finnish prospects that are considered some of the top guys in the 2024 NHL Draft in Emil Hemming, Konsta Helenius, and Aron Kiviharju. We'll get into it on this episode of Locked On NHL Prospects. Alrighty, so moving on to our final segment, we'll be talking about a trio of Finnish prospects that have looked fairly interesting in recent viewings. We've got some good, some bad, and some ugly regarding them. I want to start with Konsta Helenius because he's one of my favorites from this year's draft. He's just so electrifying. There's a lot of what he does that is just pure skill, and I love those guys. He reminds me a bit of the kind of Brad Lambert type of player, where he's constantly looking to make things happen on the ice. He's constantly looking to push pucks to the inside, to throw pucks at the net, to get a tip from his teammate, that kind of thing. So it's just there's this high-end skill set with him. The hands are fantastic. The shot is great. Mainly the playmaking is what stands out with him. He connects plays extremely well, and he's an electrifying skater as well. He's the type of player who I think will push for a top 5, contention by the end of the year, unless he has a really off year, a la Brad Lambert. I'd be very surprised if we're not talking about a top 5 prospect here, because he's got a very, very interesting skill set. He's a type of player who, when you watch him, you just giggle, and I love that type of player. Teams don't necessarily value fun as a scouting kind of category or scouting objective when they're trying to watch a player. Like, they're not ranking players by which one's the most fun. They're ranking players usually by which one's the most impactful. I still think Helenius ranks really highly in that respect. But a player who really impressed me with his Hlinka Gretzky Cup tape, and especially since coming back to TPS in the U20 Junior League in Finland, Emil Hemming has been really good. And his numbers so far in 4 games in the U20 Finnish League are really impressive. He's got 6 goals and 3 assists in 4 games so far. So looking really good.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of time before he's playing full-time Liga minutes, and I think that'll be the most useful for him. He's going to be playing for TPS, which is a hit or miss program. They've had some hits, they've had some misses. So I've heard some good things about them. I've heard some bad things about them in terms of their usage of prospects and their treatments of them. But I'm really interested to see how Emil Hemming does at the next level, because you're talking about a 6'2", almost 200-pound winger who can score goals at will, who can push the pace really well. I was really impressed with his overall work ethic in what I saw from him in the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. So he's just a type of player who you look at and you marvel at what he could be. And I'm not sure how likely he is to reach the level of a top 6 player, but the goal scoring ability is certainly there. The work ethic is certainly there. He's got the frame. Are there other elements you'd like to see from power forwards before you kind of make a judgment on them as being a potential top 6 player? Because I see shooting, work ethic as 2 of the top things I like to see from my power forwards.
For sure. Like, those are 2 of the big ones. I think one that often goes undervalued in ranking power forwards is composure. I think that a power forward needs to be really, really composed to be at their most effective. I think that that kind of goes hand in hand with also being disciplined and being controlled, because I think that controlled power is a lot more dangerous than a power that's out of control and kind of uncoordinated. And I've seen glimpses of that with Emil Hemming, where he's had the puck and under like multivariable pressure has made a very like the best simple pass that he could find, sometimes going through a couple sticks of opponents to get to make that pass. And I'm hopeful. I like what I've seen, but I still have a very small sample, so I'll leave this section here to you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the sample with me is about, the 3 or 4 games that I managed to cast for Finland, right? I mean, we're not talking about a top end sample of I'll be watching easily 20, 30 games of a lot of these top end prospects in order to make a full kind of decision as to how I feel about them. And it's one tournament. You can never rely on one tournament to kind of paint a full picture of a prospect. But you're looking at Emil Hemming, you're looking at the combination of size, shooting ability, composure, work ethic. You're looking at that combination as something that's really interesting in a player like that plays the style that he does. He's a very insight-driven player. He's a very crash the net, see what happens type of player. But he's also able to play that finesse game. He's able to connect plays at a decent enough level that I'm not too worried. He's not the high-end playmaker to the level of a Konsta Helenius or a Zach Benson, but he's got some decent playmaking tools that really make me interested in seeing what kind of develops out of him. He's going to be a very interesting player to keep a look at, and especially if he keeps tearing the U20 league apart. I mean, it's just a matter of time before he's playing full-time pro minutes. I'm very interested to see how he plays at the pro level because he's got some decently mature habits and kind of tidbits of play that he has regularly in his toolkit that I'm pretty sure that it'll be good, but it's only once you get there that with a player like that. But let's close things off with Aron Kiviharju, a prospect who, in many eyes, was mainly a top 2, top 3 prospect heading into this draft year. Especially early on last year, you could see the upside with him as a 16-year-old playing a very mature, very intelligent game at the pro level, playing always ahead of his age group. I believe he featured in the World Juniors, not this past year, but the year before that, which is very impressive for a player who's that young. I just from what I've heard and from what you seem to have seen from him recently, it's not looking as good and as promising as it initially did, right?
I mean, I remember watching him in those 2 World Junior Championships that he's already played in, which is absurd, and
Insane.
being very, very impressed with him. I think internationally, he's always really stepped up his play. The game I recently scouted of him was a Liga game, and I liked what I saw, but in terms of NHL projection, I wasn't quite as excited as I maybe expected to be. The intelligence is so clear. He is one of the smarter players in this draft class. He has a great understanding of his own team structure and the defensive structure that he's trying to break down in the offensive zone. He's constantly moving around, trying to make holes, and he knows how to use those openings to create. And he's quite deceptive in terms of whether he's going to make a pass or shoot or skate into space. That said, the tools themselves just haven't progressed at the pace that I had hoped they would. From the earlier viewings I had of him, I think that the skating is a little bit choppy. It's not as he doesn't cover the most ice defensively, but. Yeah, I have a couple questions there. I think the handling's good. I think a lot of the tools are good, but you're looking for more than just good tools when you're drafting a player in the top 10. And I haven't quite seen that level from Kiviharju yet, but it was a very early on in the season game that I scouted, so he might just be shaking off some rust. So I'm going to keep my actual judgments for later on in the year, but as of right now, I'm a little bit skeptical on the top 10, top 15 potential for Kiviharju.
For sure. I still see the potential to get back in that conversation. But from what I've heard overall, it's not looking good recently. I mean, there's only so much players you can cover. I haven't really watched much of him since the World Junior A Challenge. Not the World Junior A Challenge, but rather the World Junior Summer Showcase that included Finland and Sweden, as well as 2 teams from the USA. And he was decent, but not overwhelmingly good. So I can definitely see a scenario where he kind of drops into the bottom 15 conversation. I still think he's first-round talent for sure. It's just a matter of seeing how he gets back in the top 15 conversation, how high he can climb from there if he does. But that wraps things up for today's episode about the 2024 NHL Draft's kind of top prospects. Just updating you about that. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe and leave us a comment. Like we always say, we always keep a lookout for the good comments and leave them for our mailbag questions. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. Make sure to share this podcast with your friends as well. If you have friends that are into prospects, just get them hooked on this. We'll be posting a lot more regularly as September and October roll on. And make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today for all your sporting news, letting you know what's going on in the sporting world. And make sure to tune in for our last episode of the week, which should be coming out on Friday. We'll have some more prospect stuff coming up for you. This has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.